For more than 30 years, Conservation Northwest has worked to protect and connect the wild landscapes of the Pacific Northwest. Our emphasis on wildlife corridors has helped us build bridges across Interstate 90 to connect habitat across eastern Washington and from the Cascades to the Rockies. Our successful campaigns and groundbreaking collaborations help define our effective and creative approach to conservation. This is another ambitious effort to connect the South Cascades to the Olympic Peninsula, and we know there are going to be challenges.
Cascades is a mountain range just east of here, and it's home to mountains like Mount Rainier and Mount St. Helens, and lots of animals of a diverse nature live in those places.
And it's some of the healthiest wildlife habitat we have in the state. Likewise, in the Olympics, it's not quite as big, but it's hundreds of square miles of pristine forest and recovering forest and wetlands and rivers. And then we have this landscape in between, the foothills of the Cascades, the lowlands in the Willapa Hills, and the valleys south of Capitol Forest. Species that you might find in both of those mountain ranges that need to move back and forth would be larger ones like elk and black bears and cougars. And then smaller animals, mesocarnivores like fisher and pine marten, beavers who are semi-aquatic. And then the Willapa Hills in Southwest Washington in particular are really rich in amphibian habitat. Before European civilization came, it was really easy for animal populations to move back and forth through those landscapes.
These species would have walked right through here, very short distance, right to Capitol Forest and right onto the Olympics.
Now we have a situation where those two core areas are largely isolated, and you've got urban and urbanizing areas.
When the species needs to adapt, they move. They move to climate refugia, they move up in altitude, they move away from the problem to where temperatures are more acclimated to what they like. They can't do that. That's a huge problem. They have to deal with noise and light, fencing, development. People don't want them around. An all array of things that would keep them away from an area. When they get to I-5, if they make it to I-5, they're presented with a loud, ruckus sound, and they're presented with certain death if they attempt to cross it.
So the idea of trying to reconnect those two large landscapes through Southwest Washington, under and over I-5, under and over 12, it's really big. When we in CNW first started thinking about this project, I actually thought it was a little crazy. I was like, really? Really, we're gonna tackle this whole I-5 corridor issue? But the more I learned about it, and the more I started thinking about it, and then looking at the successes that we've had over I-90 and the just groundswell of bipartisan support that we've gotten for bridges under US 97, I thought, well, you know, this actually is possible. It's a really what we like to call a big, hairy, audacious goal, but we think that we wouldn't be worth our salt if we didn't try.
We've identified 3 major places that we're seeing corridors, and the data backs up our assertions. And we're going to be advocating in those locations for wildlife crossing structures. We are standing at the southern linkage on DNR land on the west side of I-5. This land has been identified through connectivity mapping and collisions as a key spot for a possible crossing structure in the future. And we are now standing on the most trashed side of that area. This is the DNR side where there's a lot of poaching, hunting, partying. So the habitat is not pristine here, but it's important to remember that the habitat we're trying to connect for species may not be this habitat. So this is a corridor we're trying to open up. A fisher may require much older forest than this. I'm not trying to replace that forest. I'm simply trying to give a fisher a pathway to get to its habitat to find those older forests. Conservation Northwest has partnered with the Veterans Ecological Trades Collectives to find a wildlife overpass in this location.
So we were donated in 2018 120 acres from the Fremont Dock Company in Seattle, Washington. What we've got is the ability to offer veterans a spot that they can set up a small agriculture production operation and learn how to do that with an eye towards conservation.
The connectivity corridors are highly important to this organization. Because they exist here on this site. This is a major crossing ground for a number of different species, and their aim is to bolster those species and aid in their recovery.
I've got friends who live on the other side of I-5 and every one of them has a sad story about elk with hoof rot. Some folks told me that elk that are coming through our property are coming all the way down from Joint Base Lewis McChord, which is about 40 miles from here. It seemed to me that if they were coming from that far away, that they were just a hop, skip, and a jump away from connecting with the Willapa herd, and that some genetic diversity might help the situation out for that Willapa herd.
One of the first things we did was implement a camera program on this location and started collecting pictures of animals. We've collected bear, and we've collected elk, and we've collected deer and bobcat and coyote.
You can tell it's a critical point based on the amount of animals that we capture on a game camera.
Rivers and their associated riparian corridors act as networks or highways for wildlife to get around this landscape. Those highways intersect with our highways, so it's important that we keep those underpasses clear of debris and invasives so they can move underneath them. I engage volunteers as much as I possibly can and make them a part of my crew. And a great example is the Satsup River Project, where I have 4 or 5 volunteers that are major partners on this program. A volunteer on one of my projects can expect to sing, joke, laugh, sweat, cry, maybe bleed a little bit. All those things are true, but the bottom line is we're gonna have fun, we're gonna engage each other, and we're gonna try to do something together with a common purpose. If folks are interested, reach out, check our website, and do some work.
I think it's really important for people to understand that this landscape has so much potential for partnerships and so much potential to have private landowners not look at conservation as something that goes against their interests. In this age of despair over climate change, this is another place where we can look for hope. As we restore the land for wildlife habitat, we're also sucking more CO2 out of the atmosphere, and that's what we need. Our campaign efforts are really focused on solving multiple problems, and that we can solve the wildlife and climate change issues at the same time.